Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
Got to know a little bit about King Herod the Great. He was such a nasty, nasty man. Caesar Augustus is quoted as saying, "It would be better to be Herod's pig than Herod's sons."
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
Over the last couple of programs, we've been studying the Nativity story in greater detail. And in this program, we're going to look particularly at King Herod the Great and the possible reaction by the Romans at the news of a newborn King of the Jews.
It's really sad that he was called Herod the Great because he was horrible.
Herod the Not So Great.
He was great at architecture and building, but when it comes to being a human being, he was awful. He was an awful man. The last couple of programs, we've spent a little bit of time looking at who the wise men or the magi were and what the star had to do with it all, that they were, educated in all forms of, culture, politics, commerce, the sciences, everything, religion, and that they were more than likely made up, at least in part, of Jews from the original Babylonian diaspora from the days of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, and that they were watching for the imminent arrival of their Messiah, and that there was an astronomical event that took place that triggered their belief that their Messiah had arrived, and that sent them across the desert to Judea, and that in fact they were a very large delegation, an official delegation of anywhere from between, say, maybe 20 or right up to 100 people.
Certainly not 3 blokes on a camel.
No, because they would have been targets by, robbers.
Yeah.
It's just an impractical, it's just lunacy to even think that. But, we have our romantic stories that we like to look at.
It looks nice on a card.
It looks pretty on a card, absolutely. But no, this delegation arrived and sent Jerusalem into great concern.
Let's read some of the story. This is in Matthew 2. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him.' When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea. For this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, 'Go and search carefully for the child, and when you've found him, report to me, so that I too may come and worship him.'" And of course, the story goes on from there. The Magi did just that. They went and searched about an 8-kilometre distance from Jerusalem to Bethlehem to find the child. They worshipped him, presented the gifts. Now, this is interesting. It says at the house where he and his mother were, not in the stable. So it obviously wasn't the same night or the next day. But while they slept, God warned them in a dream not to return to Herod, because Herod's intention was to murder the child, not worship him. So they secretly left by a different route and headed back home another way. But, of course, being a large delegation, they wouldn't have been able to do that very secretly.
Try to sneak out of town with 100 people. I don't think so.
So Herod was told that they'd left a different way, and he was not happy.
No, he wasn't happy. You've got to know a little bit about King Herod the Great. He was such a nasty, nasty man. Caesar Augustus was apparently a friend of his. Why he would choose Herod the Great to be a friend, I have no idea. But Caesar Augustus is quoted as saying, "It would be better to be Herod's pig than Herod's sons," because Herod was so delusional, he was so paranoid, that if he thought there was anybody posing even the slightest threat to his throne, that he would have them killed. And he actually had his 2 sons killed.
Wow.
I could be wrong on this, but I think he also had one of his wives killed as well. He was so delusional, it wasn't safe to be related to Herod. In fact, there is a place in Israel about an equal distance from Jerusalem from what the same as Bethlehem is. It's about 8-9 kilometres from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. It's about the same distance from Jerusalem to the Herodian. And it was one of 3 of his fortresses. And that's actually where he was buried. But he was hated so much that before he died, or he actually ordered that when he actually died, a group of very well-beloved Jewish rabbis were to be killed, murdered, so that when he was buried, the people would actually be in a state of mourning.
Oh, wow.
Otherwise, they'd have been rejoicing. He was such a nasty guy.
So he orchestrated the mourning for his funeral.
Yeah, he did.
Wow.
Terrible, terrible man.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, of course, the other part of this story is that with the Magi being warned to go home a different way, Joseph also was warned in a dream that, I guess Herod was after Jesus, and so he quickly got up in the night, took Mary and the baby, and they fled off to Egypt as refugees.
It's funny when, again, standing in that same place in the Herodian, when you stand on top of this, you can actually see in the distance Jerusalem. It's like, again, about 9 kilometres distance, and then you look slightly to your left and you go, wow, that's Bethlehem. And so if, when Joseph gets this dream, get up right now, and he did in the middle of the night, and take the child and his mother and get out of here because Herod's on his way and he's going to kill him. If Herod sent a delegation of soldiers on horseback, you're talking 30, 40 minutes to ride, hammer and tong from Jerusalem to get to Bethlehem. It's a short distance. And we stand there and we look at it and we go, we're talking a really short distance.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was quite extraordinary. So that's Herod. But what about the Romans? Because it says that Herod and all Jerusalem were very troubled by this large delegation of the Magi. So who else? Well, who was ruling? Who was the security? Who was governing Jerusalem? I mean, Herod was a fake Jewish king. He was a puppet.
Right. The Romans were really in charge.
They were really in charge. Herod was claimed to be the king of the Jews, but he was half Edomite, half Nabatean, little bit of Jewish blood in there somewhere. And, of course, the Jews weren't going to be tricked by him. But what about the Romans? Well, if you know anything about ancient Roman history and ancient Persian history, these 2 kingdoms had a few little skirmishes here or there, but the Romans were never able to conquer the ancient Persian people. They never were. And so for the Romans who were in charge, suddenly this official diplomatic caravan of people turns up, maybe up to 100 people, maybe more, maybe less, but a large delegation turns up saying, so where's this king of the Jews? So the puppet king, Herod, is obviously considered, well, not the legitimate one. And these guys are asking, where's this newborn king of the Jews? And
so I guess they could see that as a potential threat against Rome.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're thinking this unconquerable enemy. Are they coming to make war? Are they coming to challenge us? They're obviously challenging our puppet appointee in Herod.
Yeah.
And so you can understand why there was this concern or an unsettling, not just from Herod, but from the Romans as well. Now, I'm not saying this is actually definitely 100% what happened, because Scripture doesn't say that in specific details. But if you study history, if you study the cultures and these different empires, if you study the wars that took place and their interactions, you can come to some very strong, at least, conclusions about, what could have been happening, because Scripture says, and Herod and all Jerusalem were very troubled by this delegation, this group of, Persian diplomats, for want of a better word. And of course, the flip side of that too is, what about the religious leaders in Jerusalem that held sway over the people?
Well, they would have been troubled too, wouldn't they?
They were very troubled because, when we're actually going to talk about them next time, because were they actually legitimate religious leaders or were they not? Herod wasn't really legitimate. The Romans were invading occupiers, so they're not legitimate. So what about the religious leaders? We'll look at them next time. But my hypothetical question to end this particular program is this. Is it possible that Herod, the Roman officials, and the corrupt Jewish priests were troubled at the thought of the Jewish Messiah finally being born that would question their legitimacy and position just as the prophets had foretold.
Seems like the baby was the only legitimate one amongst the group.
Exactly.
We'll explore this some more next time on Foundations and learn more about the Jewish priesthood and what it was up to at the time of Jesus' birth.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.